Hey everyone, welcome to the instructional example video for FBC's Canada Emergency and Temporary Wage Subsidy Calculator. Make sure you have the calculator downloaded from the website and we'll get started. We're on the first page of the calculator. This is the business information page. We're going to enter some data that's going to help determine if we're qualified for the subsidies. So we're going to start off with entering the business name. We're going to select the subsidies we're enrolled in. So the Canada Temporary 10% Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. There's information links below each of those where you can learn more and make sure that you understand what's involved with each subsidy. So I recommend you read those. Going below that, we have the business revenues we have to enter. So the CRA requires you to choose between March, April, and May of 2019 or January and February, the average of those two from 2020. It's going to make you choose between those to compare to March, April, and May of this year. The reason that is they want you to be consistent. If you choose your 2019 values, you can't switch back and forth between those and the 2020 values. For this example, I've populated some of those numbers already, and we can see that if we were to choose 2020's numbers for our comparison for the subsidy, we'd be ineligible for the first two periods, but we would make it for the third. If we compare that with 2019, all of a sudden, by using all of the 2019 values, we qualify for all three. And that's completely fine. We want to make sure that we're choosing the one that benefits us the most because that's exactly what it was intended for. So with this portion of the calculator, we're just going to finish off by selecting the first day the business issued employees pay in January 2020. For this example, we're just using the 15th, but you want to put in the correct day. That's very important for determining how many days the baseline period for the subsidy is going to be. So make sure you have that correct data before carrying on to the next page. Let's scroll down, hit the link for step 2, and we'll continue on with employee information. This is the page where we will be entering most of the data, the employee data that is going to give us our subsidy information. If we look at our first employee slot here, that's going to be the owner, and we are going to set that to not at arm's length, so this box will remain unchecked. They will be paid and working, so this box will remain unchecked as well. We'll go over that box later. And then pay interval, we'll just set it to weekly, though you do have the option to set bi-weekly, semi-monthly, and monthly as well. Before we enter the remuneration paid and calculate the income tax, we want to find out the gross remuneration paid for the period leading up to COVID. That's January 1st to March 15th in 2020. For this example, we added everything up, and it's going to be $13,000 is what they made in that entire period. Throughout that period, they had 0 7-day periods with no pay. So they didn't have layoff time. And then they didn't miss the first payday of 2020 for this example. All right, for this example, we are going to enter $1,000 for each pay period. We're going to just make sure that's the same for 5. When calculating the income tax, we want to be sure to use the CRA deduction calculator. We can hit that green link on the right, and that's going to take us to the CRA's calculator. We can scroll to the bottom and hit I accept. When you follow these steps, it's going to end up generating your income tax amount. It's very accurate. That's the amount we want to be using time and time again to input into our subsidy calculator. So once you get that, you can return back to this page. We're going to enter a figurative amount of 170 for this example and make that the same for each of these periods. Scrolling down to employee number 1, we're going to have them at arm's length. They aren't an owner of the business, nor are they related to anyone who owns it. They were paid and working, so that box will remain unchecked. They were also a weekly paid employee. And their gross remuneration paid leading up to COVID, we're going to leave that blank, as if they were a new employee that was recently hired, for instance. Their salary is going to be $600 weekly, and we're going to do that for, say, 6 pay periods. And we're going to make their income tax $100 relative to that. And same, drag that across for 6 periods. So we'll notice a few different things about this example. Obviously, the gross remuneration paid, once again, it's 0. We're treating it like they're a new employee. We're seeing their CEWS amounts generate just fine. It's exactly 75% of their remuneration paid. But we will notice that there's a few blank slots here, and that can be peculiar. Like, why aren't they generating the same as the 450 from the previous period? That's because the CRA has a rule. The rule states that you can't miss 14 days consecutively in one of these periods here. So March 15th to April 11th, April 12th to May 9th, and May 10th to June 6th. If you miss 14 days consecutively in any of those periods, you're disqualified from the CEWS just for that period. If we were to go ahead and enter one more pay period of remuneration here, all of a sudden you're getting those generated. It's saying, hey, there's only one 7-day period left, you've qualified now, and you receive that benefit. So if you're partially the way through of entering someone's data and you're not seeing those amounts, be patient. They do show up appropriately as long as they've worked at least that period without missing 14 days. So that's looking pretty good for our employee number 1. Let's go to employee number 2. For employee number 2, we're going to treat them kind of like they've been a long-standing employee, but they couldn't work due to COVID. They had to stay home. They weren't able to work from home. So we're going to say they're at arm's length. They didn't own a portion of the business, but they were paid but not working. So we're going to check that box this time. We can see now that the contribution amounts for CPP and the premium amounts for EI are showing up on the sheet. That's because since they're not working, the business is eligible to get refunds on their portion of the contribution since the employee wasn't working. For employee number 2, if we use a same amount of pay and income tax paid as employee number 1, now we get those amounts generated. Once again, we're missing those last 2 slots of period number 2. Let's go ahead and just enter, one more week of pay here, just so they qualify for period number 2. There we go. And that's looking pretty good for that employee. We need to enter the gross remuneration paid as well. They've been a long-standing employee, and leading up to COVID, they made $10,000. All right, so that employee's data is finished. So we have some contrasting members of the business that we've entered, fairly different situations in each. And now we're going to take a look at how that generates for our results and subsidy information. We'll go ahead and hit results and subsidy info at the bottom. And now we're on the results and subsidy information page. So this has been laid out so that it's in line with the CRA application that you'll be filling out to qualify. So on the left, we see CRA lines A through H, and that's precisely what you would see on the CRA calculator. We have everything divided up into the periods you have to apply for. So for period number 1, we have 3 eligible employees. We have a total remuneration paid for those 3 employees of $8,800. Say you had one employee that only worked 2 weeks and didn't qualify. Their remuneration won't be included in this amount. Only the employees that qualify will have their total remuneration added in this column. The basic Canadian emergency wage subsidy, that's the total amount before anything was deducted, say for CTWS, that 10% amount. That's the amount before any of that's been removed. For employers' EI premiums for furloughed staff, that's for the staff that were paid but not working. So we check that box for the third employee. So we see those amounts considered for EI and then for line E for CPP. So those are there now. For CRA line F, that's the CTWS, and that amount's going to get deducted from our emergency wage subsidy, so we're not double claiming. For CRA line G, that's amounts received for eligible employees under the ESDC benefit program. That's a work benefit program separate from the scope of what we're covering here. If you do have employees that you've received benefits for under that program, make sure you enter those benefits that you've been given for that period in the white box. The CRA line H is the qualified Canadian emergency wage subsidy after all of these values have been considered. So originally it was $75.88. But now we've considered the $8.80 and CRA lines D and E for EI and CPP. Our total amount then is $6,872.95. If we look at April 12th to May 9th, that period is incomplete. So we're seeing that only one employee qualified. Hopping back to the employee info page, we know that employee number 2 worked 3 of those periods in that section of claim period. So they qualified, but we noticed that in our other examples, these employees did not. So we have 2 employees that didn't qualify and 1 that did. And just like we mentioned in the first period, for line B, we're only considering the remuneration of the 1 employee that qualified. The others aren't considered for that. So regarding the basic Canadian emergency wage subsidy for that 1 employee, they were maxed out, so they got the full $1,800 because the amount of time they worked in the period leading up to COVID was quite high. So you see $1,800 and then $1,800 for that wage subsidy because they had a previous amount that was actually quite a bit larger than what they're making now. So when we go back to results and subsidy info, we have a complete period and an incomplete period, just as contrasting examples of what you might run into. Briefly scrolling down to the bottom of the results and subsidy info page, we have employees hired retroactively. The CRA requires you to keep track of this statistic, so any employees that you name on the other page, their names will automatically pop up here, and you'll be able to just select whether or not they were indeed hired retroactively. This is important. It's a key when they're reviewing COVID claims for subsidies. So please keep this up to date and accurate in case the CRA does ask for it in the future. Wrapping up this instruction, we can bounce to the frequently asked questions tab, and we can review common things that you might run into. The government legislation regarding the subsidies, we can click on that link and it takes us to FBC's page. It has lots of really useful information, other calculators, updates. It's a very powerful tool if you head over there to check it out. You can click that link and it will take you to that page, and you can hit COVID resources at the top and it's just going to jump right there. So member alerts, tools and calculators, government alerts, and then small business insights if you're trying to navigate COVID as best you can. So definitely worth checking out when you're able to. Going over to our disclaimer, likewise, you're able to just review the tool itself. If you have ways you feel you could improve the calculator, help FBC, you can email us at payrollservices@fbc.ca. and we'll consider everything you put forward. We always appreciate that feedback. In closing, I want to say thanks for taking the time to learn about this calculator. It's a very powerful tool when navigating these subsidies. And once again, check out fbc.ca for all up-to-date alerts and information related to COVID, as well as new tools, anything like that. So until our next video, take care and stay safe.